In this podcast episode, Pierre Poilievre, Canada's opposition leader, shares his insights on the socio-economic and political challenges facing Western societies. The discussion spans the betrayal of the working class, cultural and ideological shifts, immigration and housing crises, geopolitics, the evolving role of AI, and the future opportunities and risks for Canada and the Western world. Poilievre offers a conservative perspective on restoring economic freedom, addressing government overreach, and envisioning a hopeful future rooted in meritocracy and individual empowerment. Poilievre opens by characterizing the last 2 decades in the Western world as a period marked by a profound betrayal of the working class, the individuals who build, fix, and move essential goods. He contends that government interventions have devastated opportunities for both current workers and younger generations entering the job market, funneling wealth and power into the hands of a small elite of well-connected insiders. This concentration of economic benefits has fostered political instability, a resurgence of socialism and protectionism. He emphasizes the urgent need to restore meritocracy, home ownership, sound money, and economic freedom, positioning these as the pillars of Western economic success over centuries. The discussion expands beyond economics to consider cultural and ideological factors. Policies like net zero emissions targets are critiqued as economic self-destruction cloaked in environmental pretexts, but ultimately serving to centralize power in the state and enrich a privileged few, often labeled as green grifters. Poilievre links mass immigration to similar economic distortions, arguing it has been manipulated by corporate elites to suppress wages and inflate housing costs, worsening conditions for the working class. Overall, he paints a comprehensive picture of a system where bureaucratic and corporate collusion continues to erode the freedoms, wealth, and opportunities of everyday citizens. Poilievre reflects on recent Canadian events, such as the government's crackdown on the trucker protests during the COVID-19 pandemic, which he views as a violation of fundamental freedoms, including free speech and mobility. He contends the truckers were wrongly punished for seeking to be heard, despite having been essential workers at the pandemic's height. While acknowledging that Prime Minister Trudeau was initially re-elected after early COVID measures, Poilievre insists that Trudeau lost support after the Emergency Act was invoked against the protests, illustrating a disconnect between government action and people's values. He stresses the need to treat governments as servants of the people rather than masters. Poilievre discusses Canada's current challenges, highlighting skyrocketing housing costs, food insecurity as reflected in extensive food bank use, rising violent crime, and immigration system problems. He criticizes the government's failure to focus the public's attention on these domestic issues due to distractions such as contentious U.S.-Canada relations during the Trump era. Poilievre stresses that Canada holds substantial natural resources and strategic advantages such as vast land, minerals critical for NATO, and energy supplies. Properly leveraged, these assets give Canada negotiating power, especially with the U.S., but harnessing this capacity requires internal reform focused on enabling economic freedom and growth. The guest elaborates on Canada's unique geopolitical position, famously described as sleeping next to an elephant, with the U.S. as its powerful neighbor whose every move influences Canada's fortunes. While some of Trump's comments and policies, such as suggestions of statehood or invading Greenland, complicated Poilievre's domestic campaign, he emphasizes the importance of focusing on what Canada can control. Regarding China, Poilievre adopts a pragmatic stance, recognizing China's extraordinary economic rise and the brilliance of its people, but firmly rejects the notion that Canada could or should sever ties with its closest neighbor and largest trading partner, the U.S., in favor of China. He stresses Canada's need for a strong security and trade partnership with America while maintaining engagement with China. Poilievre analyzes recent U.S. foreign policy shifts, including active measures against regimes like Maduro's Venezuela and Iran's theocratic government. He supports interventionist policies aimed at removing hostile regimes, citing Iran's sponsorship of terrorism and direct attacks on Canadian civilians as justification. While optimistic about democratic prospects in post-regime Iran due to a pro-Western population supported by the Iranian diaspora in Canada, He acknowledges the formidable challenge posed by entrenched entities like the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. He notes IRGC's significant presence in Canada, its role in fomenting anti-Semitic violence, and the need for dismantling such organizations to secure genuine democratic governance. Turning to Indigenous affairs, Poilievre critiques paternalistic government approaches that emphasize bureaucracy over empowerment. He argues for policies that unleash Indigenous economic potential by enabling resource development and transferring wealth directly to communities to alleviate poverty and create jobs. Notably, he highlights Indigenous support for resource projects blocked by previous liberal governments, such as the $20 billion Tech Frontier mine, underscoring the potential for Indigenous communities to become among the wealthiest globally if allowed to capitalize on their resource-rich lands. He finds Indigenous traditional values, faith, family, and tradition align with conservative principles conducive to progress. The conversation turns to the rapid rise of AI and automation, with Poilievre expressing optimism about their potential to increase the availability of goods and services at lower costs. Nevertheless, he voices concerns about the deeper question of human meaning, referencing Viktor Frankl's theory on the necessity of purpose beyond mere pleasure. With AI poised to replace many human tasks, Poilievre worries about how people will find fulfillment and meaning without work's traditional role as a source of identity and contribution. He also acknowledges emerging debates around AI developing survival instincts and autonomy, recognizing the need for policymakers to engage deeply with the implications of such technology. Poilievre emphasizes the critical importance of activating and motivating ordinary citizens, particularly working-class Canadians, to engage politically and reclaim control from entrenched elites. He believes the antidote to political anger and polarization is hope, and presents his party's focus on optimistic messaging that envisions a better future, one where people can own homes, raise families, and thrive economically. He contrasts Canada with other Western countries, suggesting that Canadian conservatism remains unified and forward-looking, with young people actively supporting his party's platform despite prevailing narratives of cultural decline. Towards the episode's end, Poilievre highlights monetary inflation as the largest unseen driver of economic injustice and wealth transfer from the working class to insiders. He explains the mechanism of inflation, creating more money without a corresponding increase in goods, resulting in higher prices and eroded purchasing power, disproportionately harming wage earners and savers. Poilievre insists that inflation is not a conspiracy, but a consequence of politicians spending beyond means and resorting to money printing as an easy solution. He warns that this unsustainable path will end either in a severe inflation crisis or a fiscal crisis brought on by rising debt costs. To fix this, he proposes shrinking government spending, cutting bureaucracy, eliminating corporate welfare, and ending irresponsible fiscal policies to restore economic stability and fairness. Finally, the conversation touches on the complex dynamics of anti-American sentiment in Canada, aggravated by Trump's provocative rhetoric and policies. Poilievre acknowledges that a degree of resentment exists, but believes it is responsive to leadership and generational changes. He argues that once contentious figures like Trump are no longer in power, such sentiments will diminish as new generations grow up in a less polarized climate, allowing for a renewed focus on constructive North American collaboration.